Welcome to the Slow Living Collective podcast. I'm Amy, wife, mother of two and devoted homemaker. Join me on this journey as we explore the beauty of slow and simple living, where life unfolds at its own unhurried pace. I'll take you through my experiences of slowing down, tending to our allotment plot, finding joy in the little things and making the most of our small home. Together we'll learn to live in harmony with the ever-changing seasons, discovering the magic that lies in embracing the present moment. So let's embark on this enriching adventure towards a more intentional and fulfilling life. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Slow Living Collective podcast. I'm Amy and thank you so much for being here. For today's episode I am talking to Jackie and we are talking about life on a small holding, and let me tell you, we had the most amazing conversation. We had so much fun and we actually continued chatting once we stopped recording as well, which was amazing. We could have spoken for absolutely hours, I'm sure of it. So let's just dive straight into it. Here is Jackie and here is our discussion about living life on a small holding. Hi Jackie, thank you so much for joining me today on the podcast. I'm so excited to jump into today's episode with you, and I know everybody listening will really enjoy it as well. So before we dive in, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Jackie. I'm married to Neil and I live in Wiltshire in the UK. I've just had my 64th birthday, which I find very hard to believe. I'm old enough to be your granny. I have two daughters. They're both grown up and living their own lives, quite nearby, quite near here. And for again, unbelievably now, we just worked it out the other day. We've been down here for 25 years, which seems amazing. Developing our own slow life and self-sufficiency ethic through a few different phases, including homeschooling on the land, running two successful businesses, taking a bit of a regenerative break, and now looking at how to restart a business which works for our next stage. So that's kind of where I'm at the minute.
That sounds amazing. So today we're going to talk about something that is really interesting to me, which is life on a small holding, and we're going to dive into all the ins and outs of what that looks like, what that life looks like, regenerative agriculture, and answer that question that everybody always asks, like, how can I get started? So I guess the best place for us to start is, what has your journey looked like so far?
So, yeah, long-winded is how it started. We were living near Milton Keynes. We were quite busy, being Mr. and Mrs. Normal. Neil worked for a print company in sales, and I worked from home some of the time, but I had our first daughter, Harriet, and she wasn't very well. She was quite poorly. She had kidney problems. And I was also struggling with all the heartbreak that I know, Amy, you're familiar with. I had problems feeding her, and there was a big saga around that. So I was quite fragile at the time. Anyway, we bought this little house, and honestly, I think I was so deep in all that grief and probably a year's worth of postnatal depression, and yeah, I don't know. Anyway, I can't understand it. It was the cutest cottage. It was so beautiful. It's down a dead end street in a village, which is quite sort of unusual around Milton Keynes. It was protected by the fact that at the end of this road there was a big house, a manor house, you know. So there was this little street, and we had a little allotment within walking distance. It was absolutely amazing, but I just didn't engage at all. I didn't love the house. I was existing. It was a very weird phase. So then Neil got headhunted to a better job with a higher salary. I got pregnant again, and then a whole bunch of horrible stuff happened all at once. We lost the baby, we lost the job, and there were some repercussions from both of those things that I won't dwell on for too long, but it was really nasty stuff. And we'd always been obsessed with John Seymour, and the book, I think it's now called, she said, looking up at the shelf, The Complete Guide to Self-Sufficiency, but I think it was then called The Self-Sufficient Life and How to Live It, or something like that. And we desperately wanted to live on a small holding. And so at that point, there'd been a sort of minor property crash. And we very foolishly believed we'd never, ever be able to afford land just by sitting in this little house and waiting for it to go up in value. Which was really stupid because look what happened, we were so wrong. We would have done, but hey, that, we just didn't think that was going to happen at that point. And so then one day I saw an ad in Farmers Weekly, and you may well ask why I was looking at ads in Farmers Weekly, but that's another night, another story. For a job on a farm in Wiltshire that came with a house, well, bungalow. And we convinced our people of faith, so we convinced ourselves that if in the unlikely event that Neil got an interview for this job or was considered for it, it was meant to be, it was God's will in our lives, and it was all meant, and because why would they consider, he'd done some farming when he was younger, but not much. It was all, turns out, they were desperate. All they did was count his legs and offer him the job, so so really it was all a bit silly, but that's what happened. And so when they offered it him, we talked and we talked and talked and talked and talked, because we knew that we were sort of giving up our dream of going to buy a small holding in Wales, which was what we really wanted to do. But it all just felt too long term. So we thought we could get down here, we could get started, we'd be renting, we'd be on borrowed land and in a Thai cottage, but we just didn't. So we moved down here to a house that came with the job, and a couple of years later we moved again. And then via a long and tortuous series of events, we eventually got the tenancy of 10 acres near to where we live. We can't live on the land, which is a pain, but we've now had it for 20 plus years, and it's honestly given us so much. I homeschooled both the girls there in a caravan while I was growing vegetables out next to the caravan and what have you. We pretty much healed Harry's gut issues, her illnesses, we got goats, and so she had raw goat's milk, and that did amazing things for her digestion, and obviously organic veg and meat, everything was just, it's repaid its rent 1,000 times. It truly has. On 2 separate occasions, we set up a community supported agriculture veg box scheme. We produce rare breed sheep. I work with the fleece, spinning and dyeing, etc. We keep dairy goats for our own use, chickens, ducks, and a retired pony. So it's pretty varied. And now we're still here. We live now in a tiny little house on a housing estate. So that one of my passions is that you don't have to live in the picture postcard setting. We live in a tiny little house on a housing estate, and then we go over to our land. And we're just now looking for a business model that works better for us as we get older, and getting back into a really deeper kind of self-sufficiency and a slower rhythm again. So that's kind of where we are.
That all sounds so incredible and so interesting as well. And it's funny when you just said about, like living in a small house. I am sort of half looking at, like, we're looking at moving at some point, and we just found the cutest, tiniest little house, like and I literally, before we started recording this episode, said to my husband, like, what have we got to do to put our current place on the market? Because and for me, it's not about moving to like the next thing that's bigger and better. We live in leasehold at the moment. I don't want to be part of leasehold anymore because of all the problems we've had. So just a small little freehold house is perfect alongside our allotment. And
I think, and I think that's where people get carried away and just trying to get more and more square feet, and that's what you're trading your life for.
Yeah,
you have to think about that really hard, actually, or that's how we've ended up, doing what we've done, is not necessarily valuing that ladders go both ways.
And it's even just that small move, so we live in Hertfordshire, and so not that far from Milton Keynes really, and the prices, and I imagine the prices around where you live as well, they're just very, very overinflated, and just a small move to somewhere that's probably not too different in size from, because we live in a split level flat at the moment, so not too dissimilar in its size, I wouldn't think, by the look of it, is an extra 75,000. And exactly. I mean, it's just it is crazy. So the simplicity is sort of what we're aiming for. If I could have found something that was like for like in price, that would have been better, but I don't think that's realistically going to happen. But yeah, so I guess, you've been talking about your journey to finding your own land and working that, and having been there for so long now. And you mentioned about like a more regenerative model. How does that stand out from usual farming methods for anyone who doesn't know?
So conventional agriculture it doesn't always, but it can deplete the land. So if you keep taking more than you give in terms of soil health, wildlife diversity, you just keep feeding the crop with artificial nutrients, taking the crop out, and so on, the land's becoming depleted. So if you think of sustainable agriculture is sustaining, it's saving what the land already has. And then regenerative agriculture, again, it comes in all sorts of different forms. And it's about trying to leave the land not just as you found it, but better, richer, more robust, more diverse. So you actually, if you like, you've gone another step up from sustaining. It's a really, really big topic, but I've thought up a couple of examples which people might sort of relate to a little bit. One of them is restorative grazing, which mimics how herds of large hoofed animals travel across the landscape in nature. So you'll sometimes hear it called mob grazing or regenerative grazing, and it's where you'll see quite intense grazing system of cows, a herd of cows or a flock of sheep, and think, geez, they're quite closely penned up behind electric wire. But in fact, they're moved on, sometimes every day, sometimes twice a day. They're just moved on all the time. And that mimics nature. Animals move on, they leave their dung behind. Their dung fertilizes the land, they lightly tread it in, and then they move on. So they're leaving behind any potential worm burden or any parasites or what have you. So then instead of having to use chemicals to treat the animals for things that may be wrong with them because they're grazing where they've just been pooping, which is not ideal, they move on. And that's what they do in nature. They move on to clean grass. And the other one that people probably really know about is no dig or minimum tillage. So no dig for gardening or minimum tillage if you're talking about agriculture, where the soil structure remains undisturbed or minimally disturbed when you're growing vegetables on your allotment or in your garden or growing arable crops. Soil degradation in this country and around the world is such that you hear this number bandied about that we've only got 60 more harvests, or we've only got 100 more harvests. I don't feel like it's helpful to get caught in that doom spiral, because I suffer with anxiety. I don't want to be thinking about that. And I really strongly believe that you need to operate in your circle of influence, not in your circle of concern. So you could sit there and worry about the fact of how many harvests are left. I just think it's really important to take care of and restore and regenerate whatever tiny bit of the global surface is yours to influence. So if that's a balcony like you've got, or an allotment, or if it's a field, or if it's a garden, or if it's a window box, whatever it is, if you can regenerate, if you can treat that regeneratively, it's more important because you can do it. It's part of your world. It's not like you can sit and worry about what other people are doing, but you can't change that necessarily. So I feel like that's really important.
So no dig is something that we have been sort of trying to implement at the allotment. I mean, we're very new to having our allotment in real terms. We took it on in, let me think, October 2021, and so 22 last year was our first sort of full year. And then this was our second year. This year it's just been, I know it's been a funny year, I think, with the weather.
It's been a funny year for everybody, but you know what you've learned? You will not believe how much you've learned. And with no dig, this is why, it just doesn't help to be a purist. With no dig, for example, if you follow Charles Dowding, who's the big no dig geezer on YouTube, everything to make a no dig bed, you need to put approximately 6 inches, or what's that, 15 centimeters of compost, good compost material, on top of a bed. But most people have just got an allotment, can't do the whole allotment. It would cost tens of thousands. So I just kind of think, if you can do one bed every year, if you can sort of go, or even a half a bed. It's still, that's your bit that you can influence, and I think that's a really important feeling to have about regenerative can be used to, and the classic example, like the one I gave first, which is about grazing. Most people kind of go, yeah, I don't actually have a herd of cows, so I can't really do that. But you can do something small, can't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I mean, when we took over our allotment, it was very overgrown. You know, most people, when they take over an allotment, they are very overgrown, and have been left abandoned a bit. So, you know, we took that first few months, we took it on in October. So we had sort of the winter to where nothing was really going on, and we put a fence around it because the kids are so small. I was like, the complete flight risk, they'll be gone in other people's allotments. So we got a very very short fence that they couldn't get over, but we could step over if necessary. And I felt like that person that I just arrived at the allotment and like was staking out my ground. So anybody that came near, I was like, this is because I've got children, not because I don't want you to step on my allotment. But you know, we sort of like carved out some beds and did some digging, and you know, we spent a lot of time walking all over it. At first the soil was very compacted because it was winter and we're stepping all over it, but we're just sort of working slowly year by year to sort of just bring the soil health up. And I was saying to my husband like months ago now, but a lot of my direct neighbours at the allotment, they all are very much like, every time I plant something, they're like, you need to put slug pellets on that. And I'm like, no, I don't, because I don't want to eat that. And it's like, if I plant a cucumber and something eats it, then so be it. Right, I'm just learning. That's all I'm doing. You know, I've only ever had the balcony. I am just learning. And you know, we don't know what was used on that piece of land before. We don't know if that person, yeah. So it's just sort of like a work in progress to try and improve the health of our soil. I think I read, and I don't know whether it's true, that it can take about 5 years if there were chemicals in the soil for that to, you know, come out.
I think it does. It depends what chemicals, obviously, but you know, you really don't know. And the thing is, land's a great teacher. You know, you find things out, and you know, you have that, like if you grow a cucumber and somebody eats it, you know, you kind of go, okay, I'll learn that. Now, eventually, 3 or 4 years down the line, you're kind of going to go, right, I want my cucumbers now. I have to find a way for this not to happen, you know. But I think that it's good to let the land teach you, really, because that's those are lessons that will be with you always.
Yeah.
You know, you'll go somewhere else maybe and have a different allotment or a different garden or something. You go, oh, I remember that, you know, and it's useful.
Yeah, I mean, last year, my first year, I had this lovely bed, and I planted alternate rows of leeks and beetroot, and they did amazing. Like I'd grown beetroot on the balcony, but it only grows very small in pots, not sort of how it does in actually the earth. And I'd never grown leek before, but you know, I knew that they were good companion plants together. And I had these absolutely beautiful, and I did like a row of leeks and then a row of beetroot, and then like a week later I did like another and I did like a few in this quite large bed, and it was incredible. And I honestly finished last season like, I know what I'm doing. Like, I know what I'm doing. So this year I thought, because I rotate the beds, so you know, I'm not doing the same in the same bed. And we've got a nice long allotment, so we've actually got quite a lot of beds. So I basically shuffle everybody up one every year, and then the top one comes back to the beginning, and we're just going to carry on like that. So this year I planted a different bed with my beetroot and my leek. Did they grow? No, they did not.
There you go, you see. You get too confident. That gets its own back with you. And then there are certain things that, you know, every year you go, do you know what? I've never grown one of those successfully in my entire life. They just don't like me. But I'm going to try again this year. And usually those things, I do have trouble with parsnips. I really do. And they just don't like me. And so, yeah, I have another go, and I, you know, use somebody else's top tips, and I know what I'm doing. I've prepped everything, and I've got everything. And then they start to go, and you think, yeah, that's wonderful. And then something always goes wrong. I swear there are plants that just, you know, don't love you. And that's all there is to it.
I was so confident in my abilities. I was like, I know what I'm doing. And then this year I'm like, oh, but I think like gardening can be like that. Just when you're confident in it, it's like, no, you're not. Hold on a second. I've got this to throw at you or that to throw at you.
Exactly that. And then there's the weather. I mean, come on,
Yeah.
it's that about.
Yeah, I mean, I have never been able to successfully grow cucumbers until this year. And I mean, I got a greenhouse this year, so that was a big, I think, a big part in its success. But I have always, they've gone, when I started them at home, they've gone leggy because not enough light. And then I had some that did all right, but then I think they got a bit shocked when I moved them outside. And so never, ever successful. This year I was like, I'm not growing them from seed. I'm not doing it. I'm not putting the time and effort in. So I went to the garden centre. I bought 2 plants that were already quite established. And I thought, we'll plant them in the greenhouse. I had like, off one plant, I had 17 cucumbers.
Yeah, when they go, mind you.
Yeah, I was like, yeah. Oh my goodness. At last it was due.
The year of the cucumber.
Yeah, and so yeah, I sometimes just think, like, a lot of the time actually it's just learning. I just wing it. Like my granddad is like, he's in his late 80s and he's always telling me like his gardening tips and stuff, and he's always like, oh, you need to make sure that you like harden them off. And I'm like, time to harden them off. You're either going to survive or you're not. But yeah, so it's just like this. I do it with my tomatoes because I'm always like, May time this year, I'd nursed these tomatoes and I was like, I'm not ready to put them out of the greenhouse.
You need to keep them close. I think the thing is as well, I'm mildly obsessed with World War II and things like that, and the gardening, the Dig for Victory and all of that, and I read a lot of stuff about that, and you think, how did they do this? How did they were under such pressure and they grew so much food and everything. Then you dig out all the old books and they were using chemicals that would scare the heck out of you.
Yeah.
How did they grow those things? Well, they dusted everything with DDT. Oh, lovely. That's nice. So yeah, sometimes when it looks as if, in the old days they did it all so well and everything, there's some slightly sinister secrets behind the way they did so well, I think.
Yeah. And I think a lot of this, especially like, for me as a newbie just starting out as well, it's like I'm just figuring it out. I'm just figuring out what works, and maybe the things that need extra TLC and need me to be going back and forth and hardening them off every day, maybe they're not my vegetables.
Yeah,
everything did fine, everything apart from the leek and the beetroot, but
yeah, but you had them last year. Come on.
Maybe it's going to be like an every other year.
Maybe.
Yeah. I don't know what I did different, so maybe we'll just blame the weather this year.
The weather, it could have been that just the nutrients in that bed were different, because obviously things that what you take out the preceding year leaves certain things behind. I'm sure you know that if you have like pea and bean crops, you leave them when you've finished with them, you leave them in the ground for as long as you can, because what they do is they fix nitrogen in that bed. So then when you go to put the next crop in, that's got a very specific kind of soil chemistry. So you might have had, the perfect soil chemistry for beetroots and leeks in that bed that year, and then the following year not. Can't tell, can you?
No.
But if you carry on with your plan of following the beds and moving them one up each time, that's exactly what will happen, isn't it? They will each be following the same thing each time. So
so I mean, maybe I'm not going to get beetroot and leek again for, like, what have I got, 8 beds? Maybe I've got 7 years till they're back.
Who knows?
Just don't need to ruin that bed in the meantime. But yeah, it's just so much is just trial and error, isn't it? Just finding out what works, and sometimes there's just like no rhyme or reason to it.
Exactly, and also it's your microclimate, your soil. You know, you have someone tell you, oh, you need to do this or you need to do that. But if they're on acid soil and you're on alkaline soil, and they're on clay and you're on loam, and they're in a lovely sheltered spot and you're in a north-facing gale, it's not going to be the same for you as it is for them.
Yeah.
So you have to know your own site as well. So
Yeah. And I think sometimes as well, like, you know, although a lot of my allotment neighbours are always telling me to use chemicals, you know, they're also really, really helpful in, you know, a lot of them have been there a long time. And, you know, they know the spot. We're lucky we are quite sheltered where we are, because our allotment is on some ground that is almost in a triangle of houses.
yeah.
The houses, even in a storm, you know, we're still quite sheltered because the wind is obviously broken by the houses. When I first got my greenhouse, I was terrified. There was a storm. We had to finish it that weekend because it was on Easter weekend. We had to go back on Easter Sunday morning, me and my husband. We dropped the kids with my mum, went back and fixed it, because by Monday there was a storm coming, and I was like, that is a massive test of our building abilities. But I actually went back on the Monday and stood in my greenhouse while the wind was blowing. I was like,
I remember seeing you doing that, thinking that is dedication. Go and stand in there.
I was like, I was because we got a polycarbonate greenhouse, because I didn't want glass with the children. And I knew there was sort of, you know, a bit more likelihood that it was a bit weaker than a glass one. There was me in like the lashing rain, the wind, and I was standing in the greenhouse, and then I was standing at the furthest end of my plot watching the panels, like, is it moving? And I was like, no, I'm fairly confident with that. And because I said to my mum at the time, this is just what I need, something else to get anxious about.
Greenhouse anxiety is real. Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, it's just like, I used to worry about, like, is someone going to break into my shed? Now I worry about, is the greenhouse going to blow down? And now I'm just like, do you know what? If a panel goes, I will replace it.
Exactly that. It's always fixable.
Yeah, I'm not going to get anxious about it. I'm not going to. It is what it is. Nature will do what it does, and we will fix it. I am borrowing the land. The land doesn't owe me anything.
Precisely.
So I know when we've chatted before we recorded, we discussed a big question that lots of people have when it comes to small holdings and having their own land, is how they can get started. And I know lots of people, I think sometimes it's a bit idealized on places like Instagram. Me and my husband have discussed it before, and you know, about whether it's a route we wanted to go down, and you know, we still don't know yet whether it's something that would be in our future. But you know, I think it is very idealized on places like Instagram or the internet in general. And you know, it's a lot of hard work, a lot of hard work. And so I'd love for you to share your thoughts on how you can get started and everything that goes with that.
Yeah, so I suppose I'd say first of all that the skills are the thing. So however you're planning on getting onto land before you do it, you can learn so much to be ready for that adventure. I'm constantly a tiny bit horrified by people who seem to have the cash to buy a nice house with a few acres, and then they turn up on a small holding group on Facebook and they kind of go, oh, what kind of animals can I keep? What should I grow? I'm like, are you kidding me? You have the time to navigate buying this house and 15 acres of land or whatever it is, and you don't already have a list of things you want to do that's like 10,000 items long. There's clearly something wrong with them, you know, if they're just not gone, you know. So I'd say really, really prepare. Learn all you can. Learn about the laws and the rules around livestock and growing things and selling things, if that's what you intend to do. Learn about keeping animals. Learn about growing fruit and veg. I you know, get an allotment. I mean, we were just talking about how much you've learned. You've learned so much from having an allotment. Yeah. So if you fetched up on a small holding tomorrow, you'd have a whole bunch of things to learn awfully quickly, but growing vegetables would be something you'd have a degree of confidence about. So people could consider woofing or helpexing. So woofing, they keep changing what it stands for. I think it currently stands for Worldwide Opportunities on Organic Farms, which is where you can go and volunteer for like a working holiday. We used to be woof hosts, and we had some amazing volunteers come and stay, and they learned a lot. Obviously, be careful picking your hosts, make sure they're genuine people. But if you do it through the woof official process, you've got some sort of guarantee of that. Some host welcome families. We had people with kids coming and teaching them to ride ponies and do goodness knows what, you know, while people were learning about organic gardening. So read a million books, go on a permaculture course, grow anything you can. Mustard and cress on your windowsill is always that classic one that everybody says, you know, if you can only grow mustard and cress on your windowsill, do that. Bake your own bread, make some chutney, knit a dishcloth, learn to mend a tractor or deliver a lamb or what have you. Follow your interests and know what you want to do when you get there. And then how you get started, I think, depends on a few things. I said to you when we chatted before, I'm inclined to shout out a bit for renting. You see people obsessed with buying land, owning land and living on it, and in this country that is such a tall order. Land is incredibly expensive. You know, if you think houses are expensive, you should see just land is so expensive. And just because you own it, a lot of people are, again, they fetch up on Facebook groups, you know, if I buy this bit of land, can I just live on it? No, you can't. Planning is an absolute nightmare. And just because people think if I own land, surely I can live there. No, you can't. So I'd say don't give up on that dream if it's realistic. If you're in a highly paid job and you and a partner, for example, you're prepared to live on nothing for a few years, save ferociously to buy land, and you live or you can live and can work in one of the cheaper or more far-flung parts of the UK or even overseas, go for it. But the world has changed, and you'll read so many stories of people who bought land, moved on to it. That was then. You can't live stories from somebody else's past without checking context. You know, it's just, we looked at a smallholding in Wales just before all this stuff happened to us donkey years ago, and it was this perfect, what you're saying, the idea, the picture cottage with a garden around it and a little farmyard with buildings and 6 little fields all fenced off. You know, this is 30 years ago or something. And it was £64,000. But that was then, you know, and if people wrote books back then, they weren't on Instagram and stuff, obviously, but they wrote books back then about how, you know, this is how we did it. And if you read those books now, you're kind of going, oh yeah, we could do that. But it has changed to such a degree. That house would probably now be around about 400,000, I would say. And what person on a normal salary, So if it's not realistic, I'd always say, honestly, consider renting and consider not being able to live in that cute farmhouse surrounded by its own land scenario. On social media, you see a lot of stuff in other countries where land is cheaper and easier to farm. So, you know, think about renting either for the short or the long term. Tenant farmers are and have been the backbone of this country. There's no shame in being a tenant. It's better than getting to do nothing. I see people sitting for 20 years doing nothing because they think that the first thing they have to do is buy the land, and if you can't, you can't. So I think in today's economic climate, it can be that you know all you earn is taken up surviving. You're not going to save up to buy your dream farm because it's not realistic. I don't like raining on people's parades. I don't want to say, I mean, if it is realistic, like I say, go for it. There are a few ways to find land to rent. I'm not pretending even that's a walk in the park, but you can check out the National Trust, Crown Estate, bigger local private estates, county council farms, Facebook groups. Don't be afraid to advertise for land wanted. I knew a lovely couple who advertised on Green Shifters. There's a site called Green Shifters for their ideal place, and she just wrote this amazing sort of essay of what she wanted and what she needed. She's a fellow homeschooler, and she got them offered the most superb house with land, and they're still there. They've been there years. You know, she wrote her story and put it out there.
Amazing.
So what else? Know what you want to do. most landlords want a business plan, or at least a clear understanding of what's going to happen on their land, because obviously they would, and always be open to a small start. And that, I mean, that's true also if you manage to buy. I know some other people who put their heart and soul into buying a house in Wales. They had to move a long distance to do that, and they managed to buy a place with less than an acre, but it gave them a start. And they did such a good job and were such good neighbours and everything. They soon managed to rent additional grazing land and buildings and make a go of it like that. So they were sort of renting a bit more. If you're really serious about smallholding and building your own home with your bare hands and running a viable business, then definitely check out the Ecological Land Cooperative, whose mission is to make that possible for a few more people. They buy up a big plot of land, split it in 3, get planning, and but yeah, Ecological Land Cooperative, look up them. So I suppose I would say have a plan, but be prepared to adapt it or abandon it. Be open to opportunity and start to do something, get an allotment, anything that enables you to get a start, get some experience. Yeah, guess that would be most of the tips, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've heard before as well, lots of people saying, like, you know, there's so much you can do in that waiting period, whether that's waiting to purchase or rent or just finding what it's going to be for you. There is so much you can learn in that period of time, so that, like you say, you don't rock up and be like, right, now what, you know.
Yeah, and I think also you will learn stuff that you love, and you might learn stuff that you don't love.
Yeah.
You know, you go woofing or something, or you go and volunteer somewhere or do a course or something and go, you know, hey up, I've discovered I really don't like pigs.
Yeah.
Me and pigs are not meant to be, you know, and that so you might, it's really important to learn, I think.
Yeah.
And also to have that mentality, that smallholding or homesteading mentality is really important, because you can live anywhere. You can live with no land, you can live like you guys do with an allotment and what have you. If it's in your heart, you'll be, you know, doing that stuff, doing the spinning and the knitting and the, you know, all those things, as well as the cooking. And, you know, I mean, like I said, I live in this tiny little modern house, and there's a little workbench between the cooker and the sink is about that big, and it's like, you know, fire cider, sourdough starter, you know, it's just like everything is crammed on there. It doesn't matter where you live, really, not really.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, you know, like just living in my little house with a balcony, and, you know, we have to travel to our allotment. It's not that far away, but, you know, we have to make that effort. We have to make the effort. And, you know, sometimes in those heat waves in the summer when you're like,
you don't feel like that watering's not going to do itself. Yeah, and that's so good for you, because if you did suddenly decide one day to go for something a bit bigger and more committed, then you know that, at least you know that has to be done.
Yeah, there's me sitting here often like, oh, it needs watering. I wonder if the roots are reaching down far enough that I don't need to go. And so yeah, it's just, yeah, it is making, you know, I think having an allotment is, you know, you have that commitment. And I know there are some people that allotment like 365 days a year. This is my second going into winter, and I am very much like harvested everything. I've planted my broad beans, which are gonna be for next year, and I've just bedded it down a little bit and just take a bit of time out, which is the beauty of an allotment, that you can just be like, right, well, there's nothing really to do here for a few months. I will see you again in the new year.
Exactly. But I mean, that seasonal pattern is really important. And I guess if you want to get into something like this, if you want to, you know, I would love nothing more than for it all to have been turned out that I could live in this cute little house surrounded by my smallholder, and I could potter out in the morning in my slippers and feed my chickens. But I would have waited a long time for that, or it wouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
So you have to make some compromises. You have to do it how you do it. And you know, in the end, it's what you want to do. It's your heart of the subject, isn't it? If you're
Yeah, and there's not even just with like a small little allotment, like there is no greater feeling than when I go there by myself and I'm just like, right, I'm gonna, maybe in the early spring, I'm gonna plant some seeds and go potter around in the greenhouse and just be in there. And it doesn't matter that I had to travel to it, that, for me as well, like sometimes I'm like, wouldn't it be ideal if I could just step out the door and do this? But I love our little allotment, and this year has been a tricky year in terms, I just, for everything, I think. But there's been times this year where I'm like, I've got to go to the allotment, or I've got to do this, I've got to do that. And I did say to my husband, I was like, I need like the break over the winter to fall in love with it again. And I can't, and I think it's normal to not always be in love with it, like always.
For
Sometimes
sure. And I also think that if your heart is about being a smallholder, is about being self-sufficient, that ties into that sort of slow and seasonal living that you're so invested in. And that is a little bit different than wanting to be some massive commercial farmer.
yeah
And you have to respect the rhythm of the season, because you know what, if you are, when we were, I mean, it's all changed a bit now, but when we were at our fullest on with what I would call our own self-sufficiency and our own seasonal slow living and what have you, and homeschooling kids and making hay and breeding sheep and all this, that, and the other. Summer is hard work, man. They are long days. It's like a long time, And when the kids were little, we didn't have a TV for a long time. And then one day, we actually said, do you know what? I think we better get a telly back, really, because otherwise we're going to die. Because, we just keep finding ourselves still outside working at 10 o'clock at night, and it's just, it's insane in the summer.
yeah
And that's actually fine if you then respect the rhythm of sitting by your wood burner, and we don't have a wood burner anymore, sadly. But if you respect the seasonal rhythm of then sitting by the fire in the winter,
yeah
and regrouping.
yeah
Read a book about the next thing you're going to do. I used to love that. You'd spend the winter reading books about beehives, or whatever it is that you're going to do next.
Yeah, and there's something so exciting, I think, when Christmas is out the way, you're in the new year and you're like, oh, spring is coming.
And you're like, cleaning my propagator.
And you're like, it's time. I was actually sorting out a cupboard the other day and I found my grow lights and I was like, it won't be long.
It's so exciting. I used to sow onion seeds on Boxing Day, because it was kind of like, right, that's it. The winter solstice is gone. The days are getting longer. I'm going to plant my onion seeds.
Yeah.
It's bizarre, isn't it? But it's good for you.
It is. And I love that feeling of like, it's coming. It's coming. Spring is coming. Better days are coming. I mean, yes. I love autumn. I love autumn. I love like the almost like finishing up and getting everything tidied away and ready for a little bit of a break. And then both New Year's that we've had the allotment, we have been up there and done some of those jobs that needed doing. Last year we moved our compost heap and just changed a few bits round, and it's a nice time. Nobody's up there in the freezing coldness of like early January, but it's just nice being out there. We wrap ourselves up, we wrap the kids up, and I mean, they don't care, they're as long as they've got something they can dig in, they don't care at all. I mean, I've had them there before digging, and my daughter's been like, Mummy, what's brother digging in? And I'm like, my no dig bed.
Never mind, though, eh?
Yeah, then I'm like, it's no big deal, don't worry about it. Like the other day she said to me, what did you plant in the bed we used to dig in? Because I need the space.
Because that's what it's for.
Yeah, because
exactly.
every year
since we've been there, I start planting in the beds, and then there's this one bed that they always play in, and it's like the last one, and I'm like, at some point I'm gonna have to take it back.
Exactly. But you know what, it comes back to 1,000-fold. My younger daughter is a lawyer, and she's very urban and very chic and very, you know, and they moved into their new house, which is very smart, you know, and I might feel a little bit like I mustn't touch anything. And then summer came, and we went over there to for a meal or something. We opened the back doors and went out into their garden, and I was like, oh, hello, what's it? Well, that's my tomatoes and that's my mint. And I thought, yes, still there. You've still got to do it. So I was very pleased about that. It sunk in.
Yeah, it catches up with us eventually. It's funny because I was never a gardener, like, ever. And my mum loves her garden. And I would we would have this joke that I would do like one day of gardening a year. That was just one day. That was, once I'd done my day, that was
it. You'd done your turn.
Yeah. And so when I said, like, oh, I've just signed us up for allotment, she was like, I'm sorry, what now?
And what day are you going to do your allotment upon?
Yeah, you do know you have to go more than once in the calendar year. But yeah, so she doesn't live that far away, so she sort of comes, you know, I've had her doing all sorts up there as well. And yeah, it's just nice, you know, my granddad comes up and tells us, you know, what we should be doing and where we should be putting everything. And it is just a nice space to just go and be. I like being there by myself. I like being there with the kids as well. Sometimes it's nice to be there without them, and they stay home with my husband. And
do you know, it's a thing, isn't it? You're passing it on to your children, and if you're fortunate enough to have parents and grandparents who've passed any part of that on to you, what I love is that sense that that literally goes back to time immemorial, that people have been planting and growing food, as well as other sort of small holdings, as weaving and spinning and cooking and preserving and all those things. It literally goes back forever.
Yeah.
And that's quite awesome, really, isn't it? You know, you think, when your children are a little tiny bit older, you know, when they've got that little sense of independence, that maybe this year they grew some peas or something, you know, you're thinking, God, I taught them to do that. And, you know, maybe my mum taught me to, and if you think about it, that's just like this huge thing. Yeah, and back to all the troubles and woes that we've got now didn't even exist, and somebody's mum was teaching them to grow peas. That's grand, isn't it?
Yeah, it's amazing. These things, like, I know sometimes, like, when I talk about a lot of the things, you know, slow living and simple living or seasonal living, and sometimes I'm like, you know, talking about things from, like, more from the past, and it's like, it's not that, you know, modern things, you know, not that there's any problem with, like, my dishwasher, right? I'm not giving up my dishwasher anytime soon. But there is so much connection in some of those things that have just been passed down from generation to generation, and I think now more than ever, a lot of that is just lost, and we're so busy all the time, and everything is about being busy, and, you know, just being distracted from some of those, you know, and
almost doing 10 things at once. You know, sometimes it is good. I think growing things and tending to animals enables you to do something, and if you're wise, you sort of turn your phone off and keep it with you in case something splits your head open, but, you know, don't actually be on it all the time, and you're just able to lose yourself, be present in one thing. One amazing thing that people have been doing for forever. It's quite a strong kind of emotional thing. I think it feeds your soul a little bit to do those things.
Yeah, I you know, as you were saying that, I was thinking about a time when I was down at the allotment. I put my phone on the shelf in the shed, or I put it on, like, time lapse, and, like, film me, like, running around doing things in, like, super fast mode. And yeah, I was just, you know, like, digging in, like, planting into a bed, and for ages, absolutely ages, I was just sort of pottering around, and then you can just get, like, lost in your own thoughts, and you know, before you know it, you're like, oh, like, you know, I better check the time, or
It's actually, there's a big move towards green prescription, because for mental health, it is an amazing tool actually, because I think what happens is your hands become busy with something. It's not a complicated something. It's just a routine rhythmic something. You're maybe if you're gonna plant some, let's get back to say peas again, you're gonna be, you're perhaps just loosening the soil and getting some weeds out, and then you're just clearing the soil, and then you're just drawing a nice straight line, and then that frees your mind to kind of relax in a way that I don't think we do very often anymore.
No, I don't think so.
It's very therapeutic, actually.
Yeah, and I suffer from anxiety, particularly health anxiety. And
so do I. Health anxiety twin. Great fun, isn't it?
It's wonderful. There's nothing greater than a health anxiety spiral.
It's marvelous.
But yeah, I was like struggling really badly with health anxiety last summer in about June 2022, and I just didn't feel great. And I particularly remember one evening I went to the allotment. I think we were maybe about to go on holiday, and I had to quickly make sure everything was ready. And so I went down to the allotment. It was June, lovely long evening. So my husband finished work, I went down by myself, and when I came back, I was like, look, I've harvested this, and like, here's some radishes, and here's some strawberries. And he was like, you are like a completely different person than when you left here. And it's like, it just brings so much joy. And like, in that situation where I was feeling, really quite miserable prior to that, just going to spend like a couple of hours there, like you say, my hands were busy, wasn't thinking about anything else, just relaxing essentially, and just enjoying myself. And it completely changed my whole mindset.
I think it does. It literally affects your brain chemistry. I swear it does. It's and I think professionals are now starting to take it quite seriously, that there may be an argument for literally prescribing that somebody spends a few hours on an allotment once a week. For all kinds of anxiety and other mental health issues. It is a healing practice. It really is.
Yeah, and I think I definitely find it good regardless of whether we go together as a family or whether I go by myself. And in times where I've definitely felt like more buried under my anxiety, just going by myself for a bit has been so helpful. And I remember earlier this year around the storm time, actually, I just went just to do loads. I wanted to just get all my seeds planted because I was a bit behind. Well, I felt like I was a bit behind compared to Instagram. Everybody been planting since about February, and this was like April, and I was like, I haven't started anything.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah.
And so I just went down after the greenhouse was put up. I went down one afternoon by myself, and I just put a podcast on my phone in the greenhouse, and I just planted for like 3 hours, and it was just so joyful. I was so like, that was a fantastic afternoon.
Sure, because apart from anything else, you've also you've allowed your mind to relax, you've kept your hands busy, and you've done something really important and primal. You're actually growing food, which it's very complicated. There's something very complicated about how much it makes you feel better, but it does make you feel better.
Yeah, but there's so much hope attached to it as well, like these tiny little seeds.
Yeah, I mean, the sowing of seeds is actually a definition of faith and hope, isn't it?
It is.
Because you're just putting this teeny thing in this sort of warm, damp mush, and you honestly are, and our forebears, and to some extent ourselves, you're actually staking your future on that. That's your food.
Yeah.
And if you go back far enough, if that doesn't grow, then you're gonna starve.
Yes.
And so the true hope of the summer coming back and those shoots growing, you just imagine that. I think getting back in touch with that is really, really important.
Yeah, and we live in a world where we don't have to necessarily pin so much hope on it, in terms of like, well, if my tomatoes don't grow, I'll go to the supermarket and buy them. But I still feel like, even though we have that safety net, we still pin all that hope on it. Like, pulling back my greenhouse door a few days later and being like, some of them are growing. I surprise even myself sometimes. But yeah, there's so much I feel like there's so much joy that can come out of that, even if you don't have an allotment or a lot of land, just got a balcony or a window box. Like, I had so much fun growing exclusively on my balcony and just figuring it out. Like, is beetroot gonna grow on a balcony? I don't know, let's find out.
It's having the courage. I go back to what I'm saying about how it's in your heart, really, who you are and what you are and how much of this you want to do. And there are an awful lot of people who have a balcony who would never in a million years potentially see that as a growing space. That, and respect to them, they've got a different life, and that's fine. They might see it somewhere to keep their bike or hang their laundry, but not actually grow things, and similarly, if you decide that somehow you want to do this self-sufficiency, slow seasonal living, small holding thing, I just think that very often where there's a will, there's a way. And that's why, going back to what I was saying earlier, I get slightly troubled by people who have read all those old books, which are lovely, and maybe watch some old films and what have you, and so I've got the idea that the very first thing you've got to do is buy some land, and it has to be land that you're going to live on, because that's going to stop a lot of people.
Yeah.
That is the equivalent of, you looking at your balcony and saying, well, it's got to have a bike and some laundry on it, so there's no way I think you've got to get rid of that mindset and go, I want to grow some stuff. Yeah. And I actually want to rear some animals, and I actually want to bake my own bread and do all this really weird stuff, and nothing's going to stop me. I'm going to find a way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even with the balcony, I was like, you know what, I need a little greenhouse. So, those little plastic greenhouses, they might fly away everywhere else, but on a balcony, I can.
You're good. You can tie it
down. And so, yeah, I mean, I had two out there at one point, a big one and a little one, because the big one wasn't enough. And so, yeah, it was just, just figured it out. Will this grow on a balcony? Let's find out. Are we going to become self-sufficient from the balcony? Probably not, but it is a start. And the year I had my son, I was like, I'm not going to do anything this year, because he was due in May, and already by spring I was like, I'm over it. I actually ended up, I was like, I'm not doing it. I will rest and relax. No, I was out there at like 36 weeks pregnant, kneeling down on the concrete balcony. Pelvis felt like it was going to fall off, and I just grew actually the most amount that I ever had, and it was just I was already on the list for the allotment then, and so it was that following October that we got called for the allotment. And
I was in hospital. Both my children, sadly and unfortunately, were born by C-section, and I was in hospital with my younger daughter, and I don't know what it is now, but then you used to have to stay in for 5 days if you'd had a C-section. And on the third day, my husband came in to see us, and the lovely midwife who's in charge of the ward said, what's he brought you in? Because normally it's like chocolates and this, that and the other, and he's got this Tupperware with him, and he said, homegrown tomatoes. she went, you can go home a day early.
Oh, fantastic.
That's a high degree of common sense. You can go home a day early.
Yeah.
I'm thankful for those tomatoes.
Yeah, it's having the growing with little kids, I find it really interesting. They just love it, and they love being out there. My son is slightly less outdoorsy than my daughter. She'll go for it, but he spent practically all of his life, bar the first 6 months, at the allotment. We just take his pram up there, he'd nap there, he'd be attached to somebody's back. Like, I did gardening with him strapped on. That's why I've got such a bad pelvis now, but I had him just strapped on my back, and I'd be like digging and all sorts. Like, we have all of these little old time-lapse videos of us moving compost heaps with people on our backs. We'd get home and be like, that wasn't just a good workout because it was gardening. We did it with
weights.
20 pounds on our back as well.
Exactly. But I think that stays with them as well. And like I said, I was homeschooling my two at the stage when I was running the CSA for the first time. We've got this old caravan which we used to go on holiday in, but I mean now it's never moving anywhere ever again. And it's just at the top of where the market garden was, and we've knocked a lot out of it now, but at the time nothing had changed. You had the little bench seats with the little table in the middle at the front, you know, where and they'd be sat there one either side with all their sort of homemade stuff, all their books and their workbooks and their, you know, topics and things that they were doing and books that they were making and all this and the other. And I just put my head in every now and then. How you doing? You're doing all right? You know, anytime you want to come out and help, you can come out and help. And I was growing veg, and it was just like it a lot of people thought it was really idyllic. It's a bit strange, but I think it served them well. I think it served them really well. It's in their hearts now, that whole thing of providing food while whatever else you're doing, you're growing your food and you're being outside and you're following seasonal patterns and it's a good start for children.
Yeah, and I think as well, you know, just that slowing down compared to, you know, like the fast pace of regular life. You know, I just hope with, you know, like homeschooling our two, I just try and prioritize, you know, that when it's time to rest, you know, it's okay to rest. I don't want them to have to learn to rest when they're like me in their 30s. And so, you know, it's you know, I hope that I can embed that in them, and so they don't have to relearn it down the line.
Yeah, and also the concept, I think, that is sometimes missing these days, of useful work. That growing things and making, you know, that whole seasonal thing is useful work. Very often kids that are in school, I think, sometimes are provided with things to fill time that isn't the same as doing something which is useful and productive. And I think that feeds their souls a little bit as well, but maybe that's just me.
Yeah, no, I would agree as well. And I'm looking forward to, without trying to rush their childhood, I'm looking forward to them as they grow and, you know, get more involved in the allotment. You know, we've got plans to, you know, have them grow their own, you know, have their own bed and grow their own stuff. And just, I mean, we already do it a little bit to an extent, just some wildflowers and things at the moment. But I mean, when all of the flowers died, my daughter was devastated. I was like, goodness, I was starting to pull them out. She's like, oh, what are you doing to my flowers? And I was like, they're dead, but we'll keep them, it's fine. So yeah, it's
an important lesson though.
Yeah, it's, you know, everything has its cycle. And I always say to her, because she's, you know, she's 4, almost 5, so she's got much more understanding than my son, who's 2. And you know, if something dies, like I didn't do very well, my butternut squash never made it this year, and so I just like pulled it up, and she was like, what are you going to do with it? And I'm like, I'm going to put it on the compost heap and we're going to give it back to the earth. So it's not done, and it's not, you know, it might not have become a butternut squash, but we're going to feed the plant that it was. We're going to put it in the compost heap, and it's going to decompose, and it's going to serve our garden in another way. And you know, we try and teach them that with, like, you should be eating an apple at the allotment, and she like, try and give me the core, and I'm like, to the compost heap, we'll give it back to the earth, and we'll watch it decompose. Like when we lift up the lid, they're like, oh. But yeah, it's just, there's so much learning that goes on there in just, you know, it's to us, we're just like, you know, it's just gardening, but they're learning all the time. There's so much learning that can exist outside the classroom.
Exactly, and it's really wholesome learning, and it's peaceful, I think, for them as well. Like we find it therapeutic. We're talking about how we find it therapeutic. I'm sure they do too. It gives their brain a space, and very important stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been such a wonderful conversation, and I'm sure we could talk for absolutely hours, actually.
Weeks, probably, yeah.
So where can people connect with you online?
So best place is probably Instagram, where I'm Chestnuts Farm. On Substack, where I have Smallholder Journal. And we also have our farm website, which is chestnutsfarm.com. That is currently down, being updated. We'll be back up and live shortly. So, but those 3 places really would be the place to find us.
Excellent. Well, I will link all of those as well so people can come and find you. So thank you so much for taking time to come and chat with me.
Thank you for having me. It's been huge fun.
You are more than welcome. I told you that was an amazing conversation, didn't I? I think there has been so much in this episode that has been so useful. So many amazing tips. I am going to link everything that Jackie mentioned down in the notes, so you can click there. Be sure to check her out. Like she said, you can check her out on Instagram, on Substack, and also on her website. You'll find the links for all of those things in the description for this podcast as well. So I just want to say a massive thank you to Jackie for taking the time to join me. It was an amazing conversation, and I think, like I said, there's so much to be learned. I know there are so many of you guys who your ultimate dream and desire is to have your own land, have your own small holding, homestead, etc. And I think, like Jackie said, there is so much you can do in that wait period. So much. So you don't have to wait until you have the funds to be able to buy your dream. There is so much you can learn in the wait, and there's so much you can do in the wait. And I think that's so important and such great information. So like I said, be sure to go and check Jackie out. She talks about her life on a small holding on her Instagram and on her Substack, and I think you will absolutely love it as much as I do. Now, you can also follow me, of course, over on Instagram. I'm there at The Slow Living Collective. You can also follow me on Substack, which is theslowlivingcollective.substack.com. I can never remember what I'm talking about. And then you can find my website, theslowlivingcollective.com, as well. So that's where you can find me. I will link all of that, all of my stuff, all of Jackie's stuff, everything Jackie mentioned. I will link it all in the description. So be sure to check it all out, and I will catch you guys in the next episode.